We will explore a world where Nazi Germany dominates Europe, the Cold War ends in nuclear fire, and the United States never breaks free from Britain. We will see the Ming Dynasty discover America, Napoleon rewrite Europe, the Confederacy split the US in two, and we will go from interesting to scary to world-ending. What if World War I never happened? World War I might have been avoided if European powers had defused the July crisis diplomatically after Archduke Franz Ferdinand's assassination. Without the alliance system, Austria-Hungary could have accepted Serbia's concessions. Britain or France could have pressured all parties to negotiate. Without war, millions of lives would be spared across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Monarchies like those in Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary might endure into the 20th century. The Russian Revolution likely wouldn't happen, keeping the Romanovs in power. Lenin might die in exile, and communism might remain a fringe ideology. Without the Treaty of Versailles, there would be no national humiliation for Germany. The Nazi Party would likely never rise, and World War II might not happen. The Ottoman Empire could survive longer. The United States might stay more isolationist. Technological development, especially in aviation, medicine, and weapons, would be slower. Colonial empires would persist much longer, as nationalist movements in Asia and Africa were fueled by the war's destruction. The League of Nations and the United Nations might never take shape. Nationalism and militarism would still fester, but perhaps more locally contained. Without the trauma of World War I, the world might be more stable. What if the Roman Empire never fell? The Roman Empire could have survived if they ended overexpansion, managed succession better, and embraced the technological innovations. Christianity could have been fully integrated into imperial identity earlier, preventing internal strife. If the Eastern and Western empires remain united, external threats might have been absorbed. The Dark Ages might never happen. Roman infrastructure, law, and bureaucracy would continue evolving. Europe could industrialize centuries earlier under Roman guidance. Latin might become the global lingua franca, and Roman-style republics could evolve organically. Global exploration might begin much earlier with Roman naval expansion. Christianity would dominate with a centralized religious authority based in Rome. Slavery might be abolished earlier or persist longer. Native American contact with Romans might lead to entirely new civilizations. Architecture, engineering, and education would remain highly advanced. Europe might colonize space in the modern era as a Roman federation. The Renaissance, if it still happens, would come far earlier. Nationalism might not emerge, replaced by imperial unity. The world could be far more unified or crushed under internal empire. What if Napoleon had won at Waterloo? Napoleon could have won at Waterloo if Marshal Grouchy had arrived on time, or if the Prussians had been delayed. A French victory would allow Napoleon to reclaim control of Europe briefly. Britain might sue for peace, and Austria or Russia might hesitate to challenge him. The Napoleonic Empire would be restored, at least temporarily. Napoleon might reform Europe into a federation of client states. Nationalism might develop under French banners instead of German or Italian. The Holy Roman Empire wouldn't be restored. Germany and Italy could unify under French influence. France would likely have a bigger role in the Americas. The US might drift toward France instead of Britain diplomatically. Napoleon's death would trigger a major succession. A second Napoleonic Empire could arise under his son or relatives. Monarchies in Europe would weaken permanently. The French Revolution might be avoided or reshaped under French oversight. Britain's global dominance would be weakened. Russia might expand into the Balkans or Middle East unchecked. The Crimean War might be very different. Modern European borders and power balances would shift entirely. French language and culture would have even greater global reach. That was interesting, but now it's time for the scary. What if the United States had lost the Revolutionary War? If Britain had won the Revolutionary War, perhaps by cutting off Washington's army or winning stronger loyalist support, the colonies might remain under British control. Harsh reprisals and British military rule would follow. The idea of American democracy could have been crushed or delayed. The US would not expand westward as quickly, and Native American nations might persist longer. Canada, the US, and the Caribbean might become one British super colony. American culture would resemble Canada. France might not have its revolution without US inspiration. Without the US as a revolutionary example, liberal uprisings in Europe and elsewhere could be weakened. The Napoleonic Wars might not happen as we know them. Latin American independence might be slower. World War I might unfold differently. Without an independent US, Germany might dominate Europe longer without American intervention. World War II might see a German victory without a strong America. There would be no Cold War. Germany or Britain would likely be the superpowers. English would still dominate, and US independence might eventually occur, but the American dream as we know it might never exist. What if China discovered the Americas first? If the Ming Dynasty had continued Zheng He's voyages instead of shutting them down in the 1430s. Chinese fleets might have reached the Americas. With superior shipbuilding and navigation, they could colonize parts of the Pacific coast. Contact with Native Americans could lead to trade or conflict. Confucian values would spread instead of Christianity. Chinese agriculture techniques and governance structures might influence American societies. If China settled the West Coast, European explorers might encounter a strong Eastern rival upon arriving. The Columbia Exchange would be very different. Horses, smallpox, and guns may still arrive, but the balance of power would shift. Chinese writing and language could influence names, governance, and education in the New World. East Asia could become the economic and political heart of the world. The balance between global powers would shift toward Asia. Japan and India might also be pulled into the hemispheric influence earlier. A Pacific-oriented global order could emerge. Modern-day California or Peru might be centers of Chinese colonial culture. The Enlightenment and scientific revolution could come from Nanjing instead of Paris or London. Today's world would likely speak Mandarin, not English. In the 21st century, China would dominate the world for better or worse. What if the Confederacy had won the American Civil War? The Confederacy could have won if it allied with Britain or France, or if key Union victories like Gettysburg or Vicksburg were lost. A Confederate victory would split America in two. Slavery would continue, possibly expanding to the Caribbean or Latin America. The Union might remain industrial, while the Confederacy stays agricultural. Tensions could remain high for decades, possibly leading to more wars. The South might eventually abolish slavery under international pressure. Civil rights movements would be far weaker. The US as a global superpower might never emerge. The Confederacy might align with European powers like Britain, especially during World War I. World War II might see divided American response. The Axis powers might have won World War II without a unified America. The atomic bomb might be delayed or developed by another nation. A Cold War between the North and the South might arise. American culture would be less influential globally. The United States would be just one of two rival American republics. What if the Cold War turned hot? A hot Cold War could have started if the Cuban Missile Crisis escalated and either side launched nuclear weapons. Alternatively, NATO and the Warsaw Pact might have clashed in Berlin or Korea. A US-Soviet war would likely begin with massive battles in Europe. Nuclear escalation would follow soon after, with major cities being destroyed. Hundreds of millions would die in hours. Fallout would poison ecosystems and agricultural production, causing global famine. Survivors would live in a post-apocalyptic world dominated by radiation zones and martial law. Governments would likely collapse or become authoritarian. South America or Sub-Saharan Africa might escape the devastation. However, global trade and economy would collapse. The United Nations would be powerless. If any superpower remained functional, it would rule through military dominance, not democracy. Religion, nationalism, or survivalism might replace ideologies like communism and capitalism. The space race and internet age might never happen. Civilization might take centuries to recover, if it does at all. What if Germany had won World War II? Germany's victory in World War II could have happened if Operation Barbarossa had succeeded quickly, knocking out the Soviet Union before the harsh winter, or if Britain had agreed to a peace settlement after the fall of France. A delayed US entry, or better yet, no Pearl Harbor attack, would have limited American involvement. With the USSR crushed and Britain neutralized, Germany would dominate Europe. Hitler could have solidified control over the continent, establishing puppet states and Aryan colonies in Eastern Europe. The Holocaust would likely continue unchecked. The Third Reich might have focused on developing nuclear weapons, possibly triggering a Cold War with the US. Opposition would be crushed. The United States might retreat into isolationism. Japan, holding much of Asia, may have entered into a Cold War standoff with Germany. The Axis powers would carve the world into spheres of influence. Israel may never be established, and the Middle East would be influenced by different powers. Technological advances might focus on military and aerospace breakthroughs. Resistance movements would persist across Europe. The Cold War could have been between the US and a German-Japanese alliance. The eventual collapse of the Nazi regime could take decades, or might never come. The modern world would be unrecognizable, defined by tyranny, propaganda, and global fear. Thanks for watching, and subscribe so we can beat Tuvalu in population.